Hello everyone, and welcome to a new Garden Walkabout. In this video, I'm going to go over multiple topics, and I hope that you stick around and listen to me chat with you about my wild garden and my wild approach. So as you can see, this is my view from the patio, and this is the passion vine archway. I've got mist flower around, and you know what? I just want to take a little side note and say that this mist flower plant, which I think it's called blue mist flower specifically, is one of my new favorite native plants. Because number one, it fills space well. It gets very lush. It gets just the right height to shade out things like Bermuda grass. And if you have Bermuda grass in your garden, you know how much of a pain in the butt Bermuda grass can be. So if you have a moist enough area, plant some mist flower. And if you don't have a very moist area, still maybe try to plant a few seeds of mist flower and just see how they do, because they seem pretty resilient. I don't think I would put them in the driest areas, because those driest areas, they're going to get a little sad, especially in July and August, mostly August. Some of mine are actually even a little bit sad in August, and they're typically in the more moist areas of my garden, so you know, you just gotta play it by ear, especially if you have a garden like mine where you're up on a hill, it's full sun for the most part, and you get kind of like that seasonally wet, seasonally dry situation. When that seasonally dry situation comes, and this year it came twice, so that sucked. But when that seasonally dry season comes, you really want to have things in there that are drought tolerant. So use mist flower with caution in those areas. They really prefer more moisture than that. And also, mist flower can handle being in a container for a little while, but again, if you're not watering them enough, they're going to eventually look sad by about mid-August. So just go ahead and put them in the ground instead, and try to plant more drought-tolerant things in containers like lance leaf coreopsis, for example. So right here is Homestead Purple Verbena. It is a plant that I didn't know was native. I think it's actually native. I might have to do some more research on that to be 100% sure, but they sell it at a native nursery near me. So I think it's safe to say that they're native. And I just didn't know. I actually bought mine from a big box store, unfortunately, before I really knew that that could be a harmful thing to do. And the reason that can be harmful is, you know, you don't know, like, are there pesticides on those plants? Like, how do you know for sure that there aren't? And you could kind of make the point that you never do know unless you watch it be grown, and I can see that, but just the big box stores are more of a risk than the native nurseries, so keep that in mind as you plant. But I do want to say some things in this video. Yes, my garden is weedy. Yes, my garden is messy. My garden is meant to be a wild garden. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing I want to say is I am very patient with things more than maybe the average person, and I can put up with some mess as something is getting, over time, gradually getting better. I feel like everything is a process, especially with native plant gardening. So I do have a lot of non-native plants still, but as I add new plants to my garden, they're either native perennials, native annuals, or they might be non-native seeded annuals, for example. So I call them temporary plants. Anything annual, anything non-native, I consider a temporary plant. So what do I mean exactly by a temporary plant? I just mean it's taking up space right now, and eventually it will be replaced by something more appropriate to the site and native. So I look at everything as temporary, because a garden is a living thing. It's not a statue. It's not a statue that is, cemented to the ground and never coming out. It is an ecosystem that is evolving and changing, and the gardener evolves and changes hopefully as well. I have a lot to learn with design when it comes to the garden, with laying out the plants, with layering the plants, with mulching with plant material, because I recently found out from a friend that there's actually been some studies to show that sunflowers, and such as those sunflowers you see right now and the Mexican sunflowers below them, there's studies showing that they can be, I forget what the word is, but they can cause trouble in the soil for plants to grow. In fact, grasses, of all things, seem to be pretty immune to them, but the chemicals inside the plant material, as you use them as mulch, can inhibit growth of a lot of the plants I would actually want to grow, so that is a problem. So I'm not going to be doing what I originally planned in this spot, which I originally planned to chop and drop. I was going to chop all the celosia, all the zinnias, all the Mexican sunflower, and the big mammoth sunflowers down, and I was going to let them fall to this soil around this hawthorn tree that I have. You'll see it hopefully later in the video. I'm going to zoom in on it. It's a tiny baby tree right now, and it has little thorns. But anyway, my plan was to chop and drop all this and use it as mulch, because I already had seeds for Mexican sunflower. I already had mammoth sunflower seeds. And it was a way for me to kind of create my own mulch for free. But I found out that this plant material can inhibit growth of pretty much any seedling except grass, which is the opposite of what I want. I have a lot of non-native invasive grasses in this garden, and I don't want to encourage them and discourage all the things that I actually want to grow. So my new plan is to pull these out by the root as much as possible, and the ones that I can't get out by the root, I will cut them back, and I will put them in places where I do want to inhibit growth of anything, like maybe next to a certain section of my fence, or maybe I can throw them in their own separate pile out back and try to create some kind of compost out of them, and then learn where to put that compost. Maybe I can create a compost from them that is specifically for my native grasses. I don't know. I might have to do some research on it to figure it out. But here's my passion flower vine going absolutely ham. It is growing on a natural archway that we created out of, I think it was box elder branches, grapevine branches, and crepe myrtle branches. Because one of my neighbors cut their crepe myrtle way back, and they cut it so far back that there was thick, sturdy trunks. And so we put all that together. We cemented in some wood to attach it to in the ground, which we probably used too small of pieces for it, but that's beside the point. Eventually this is going to rot away and we're going to have to replace it. And I know that, and that's fine. Temporary, it's temporary. This is an oak tree with mistflower around it in a pot. And I know that oak tree is kind of being smothered at the moment, but it's all an experiment for me. I'm just figuring out what can work, what cannot work. And that's a topic I really wanted to bring up. Pay attention in your garden to what really works and what really does not work. What are some things that aren't going the way that you want? What are some things that are going better than you expected? I think the mistflower as a ground cover, as a weed inhibitor, is going way better than I expected. And the only regret I have is not planting more of it sooner. And another thing I want to do is plant more drought-tolerant ground covers as a living mulch, because, the mistflower, like I said, likes more moisture. So it would make sense to kind of intermix it with drought-tolerant ground covers, because, with climate change and everything, it's not really that predictable anymore. And you don't know if you're going to have an especially wet year or if you're going to have an especially dry year. So it's just better to have a mix of things that like moisture and things that can handle dry conditions. Because this year we had a very interesting situation. Back in June, I think it was, it was just dry. Dry as could be. I had to go out and I had to water over and over and over and keep it watered like crazy. And remember, native plants are adapted to the area and they're adapted to our weather conditions. And if you get the right plants for the right place, they're adapted to your soil conditions, right? But there's a caveat to that, because climate change is a thing and it's less predictable. So June was extremely dry, had to water everything because, it's still kind of a baby young garden, and I had a new garden space I started with some annuals that were a mix of native and non-native. So I had to water and water and water quite a bit in June. But then July came. July happened. July was like the exact opposite here. July was very wet. Rainstorms that brought buckets and buckets of rain. It may have even been a record for our area. I can't really tell you for sure. But June was crazy dry. July was crazy wet. And then August came. And here we are. This is an August walkabout and tour. But I think I recorded this walkabout kind of mid-August, so you're seeing it a little bit later. You're seeing it at the you are getting this video content at the beginning of September, but the videos itself, these clips are actually from August, okay? About mid-August. Now, I do want to say, since I don't have it recorded because this is early mid-August, you're not seeing like later in August. And let me tell you, as August went on, it became very clear that August was basically June. So we went from a dry June and a wet July to a very dry August. So right now in the garden, after this was already filmed, like looking out my window right now, things look a little rough and a little sad. I did water the other day pretty deeply, but I just don't think it was enough. I think I'm going to have to water again sometime this weekend. And probably again next week. And I'm probably going to have to kind of go back to my old watering routine that I did in June, because August is very dry for me right now in my garden. And it's not even August anymore. I want to point that out too. Like, as I'm recording this audio, you're seeing August on the screen, but me in the present talking to you right now, I'm doing a voiceover, and I'm recording this voiceover September 2nd. And it's still not looking great. Like, when I look at the weather, it says it's going to rain, says it's going to storm, and it says it's going to do a lot of that next week, but I just don't believe it, because it's like 30%, 40%. And lately, even when we get like a 60% or a 70% chance, if it does rain, it's literally like sprinkling. And it's almost nothing. And it doesn't really do anything for the plants, They're just getting a little bit wet, and that's it. And so it's not really even soaking into the ground at that point. But you also don't want a situation where the rain is just right out of the gate pouring down super fast after being bone dry, because that creates runoff situations, and then it won't really soak in as it should. So let's talk about strategies for this. Number one, plant drought-tolerant plants, but try to find drought-tolerant plants that are pretty adaptable to moist soil if you have clay, because the issue is, in the wintertime it can get really wet, in the fall it can get wet, in the spring it can get wet, and even the summer, some summers can get pretty wet. Again, it depends on the month, and it depends on what kind of storms are coming through. So if you have clay, it's going to hold that moisture a lot more, but when it's dry, it's going to feel like a rock. So if you have clay, or if you have anything kind of in the ballpark of that, if you're on a hill, if you're like me and you're south facing, oh man, you need some drought tolerant plants, trust me. But that doesn't mean you abandon the moist plants like mistflower, because like I said, mistflower is like the most beautiful thing in my garden right now. Even though the leaves are kind of sad and drooping right now, it's still like the prettiest thing I have at the moment. So keep that in mind, and just try to companion plant as much as you can things that Maybe you wouldn't always be told to companion plant together, but that you tried and it worked out really good. You know, those are the wins that I just love, is when I just try something and I experiment and it just works out. So, I've talked about temporary plants, I've talked about mistflower, I've talked about drought tolerant and, adaptable plants. Let's talk about mulch in general. To me, there's like a few kinds of mulch. There's temporary mulch, and there's a more permanent solution. So, what do I mean by temporary mulch? Temporary mulch is anything that you bring in that isn't naturally on your property that you have to continually bring in. So, what I mean is bagged mulch, or a dump truck full of mulch that you called to have someone bring to your property. Wood chips, arborist chips, maybe they were even free, but you still had to have someone bring them to your property. You didn't produce them from your property. So, a more permanent mulch would be something like green mulch, and specifically perennial plants as a mulch, a living mulch. So what this means is things like, again, the mistflower, something like ponyfoot, something like wild geranium or wild petunia, something like Carolina cranesbill, something like wild strawberry. These things, I don't want to leave violets out, something like the wild violet. These are things that can help you smother weeds, block weeds from growing, block weeds from germinating, taking up space. These ground covers can take up space and cool the soil, keep the moisture in place, all the while being a permanent mulch, because that's really what it is. If you think about it, it's a permanent mulch solution. It saves you money, it saves you time, it saves you work, it saves you energy, and that means more time just enjoying watching the pollinators in your garden and watching the seasons change out your window. And if you're anything like me and you are very sensitive to heat and sun, and you have a south-facing, very sunny garden, you probably don't love to be outside in the summer. You probably maybe like to look out the window at your garden and in your air conditioning. That's what I like to do in the summer. And so I will fully admit that in the summer, I have weeds all over the place. So instead of trying to go out there and kill myself by being out in the heat and getting really hot, getting really sweaty, feeling miserable, instead I try to plan ahead, and I try to gradually over the years add more and more ground covers, add more and more native living green mulch via these shorter plants. It's really that simple. It's just plant more shorter plants. Specifically, plant more shorter plants that spread like crazy, that are native. Make sure they're native, though, if they're going to spread a lot. Because those are your friends. I'm telling you right now, those are your friends. Let me go over specific plants that I have, and this is a short list because there's so many you can do. You can do so much with ground cover and living mulch, but I'm just going to go over some very limited, a limited list of plants for you. Violets are great because they're usually free. Let's be honest, violets are in your yard. They're already in your lawn. People are trying to kill violets all the time. Instead of them killing their violets, as long as they're pesticide free in their yard, ask them if you can dig up their violets for them out of their lawn, and then you've got free violets for your garden. I mean, why not? But you probably don't even have to, because you probably already have a lawn, and you probably already have like thousands of violets in your lawn right now. You don't even know it, because when we mow, we don't always get to see all those little violet flowers if they do get nicked. They usually don't get nicked by the mower if you keep your mower the right height, but I'm just saying, if they're in your lawn, sometimes we miss them because they kind of just blend in with everything else. But they're there, and I want you to look for them because they're free. Just dig them up, divide them. Make sure you get the weeds out of them. Like sometimes they're almost all the time. If they're in your lawn, they'll be mixed with like Dallas grass and crabgrass and Bermuda grass, and you gotta kind of pick all that. You gotta tease all that apart. But when you do that, pop it in your bed. Pop it in your garden bed. I know way too many people who whine and complain about violets, and I'm over here like, are you kidding me? Like, that's your ground layer. That's your ground cover layer. What are you talking about? It's free. It's from Mother Nature. That's your ground cover layer. Not only that, it is a host plant to fritillary butterflies. I always forget which fritillary butterflies host on it, but you can Google that. Fritillary butterflies are freaking gorgeous, okay? So why not grow the violets? They're so short. They're not going to smother any of your stuff. People think they are because they just see it in their lawn and they're like, there's a violet there, which means my turf grass isn't in that spot. I don't get the panic. I don't understand it. I've always let flowers grow in my lawn. I've been told before that, like years ago, I've been told before that, everything in our yards, someone in our neighborhood, everything in our lawns is just mostly weeds. Or maybe they were even just talking about my lawn specifically, like everything in your lawn's like weeds. And I'm like, okay, Jan, whatever you say. All I do is mow it, so what do I care? What do I care? We just mow it. It's just short and green. Like, what? That was back before I had, like, hardly any garden at all. I had, like, 3 plants to my name. So, it's funny to me, because it's like, what is this meticulous perfectionism that's rampant? When, like, we're all perfectionists about... Not all of us, but a lot of us have been taught to be perfectionists about our lawns, and like, it's all got to be turf grass, and it has to be this specific species of turf grass, monoculture, and that's it. Can't have anything else. But this weekend, I'm leaving my house, and I'm driving about an hour away to a nature center to spend some time in nature because it's beautiful. Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? Why aren't you creating this at your house? Sorry, like, just let that sink in a minute, like... Just let that sink in. We spend all this money on gasoline and all this money on mowers and maintaining everything to be like, what, short little grass that you'd see on a golf course? But we don't even really like it. Like, we think we like it, but we don't really like it because we drive like 2 hours away to go look at waterfalls and wild gardens and woods and forests and grasslands and native plants. I mean, call me crazy, but that makes 0 sense. Anyway, rant over. Back to the list of topics. So, when I plant a garden, my number 1 tip that I want to share is plant densely. I'm going to be honest with you, I plant too densely. But I plant too densely for a reason. I plant too densely because I have a full sun, very difficult site that's on a hill that gets this full, hot, blazing sun pretty much all day long. 6 hours is a joke. It's way longer than 6 hours. I've lost count how many hours my garden gets full sun. It's a lot. And so, I've got to plant densely because anywhere where I don't plant something is space where Bermuda grass comes, Dallas grass comes, crabgrass comes, and any other non-native grass. When I find native grasses in my yard, I get so freaking excited because the non-native invasive grasses in my yard are so prolific and aggressive that the native grasses in my yard are like few and far between. I have like 4 total blue stem grasses in my backyard, none in my front yard that I know of. And I have like some oh, I forget the name of this grass. It's a grass that likes moisture, and it gets the cute seed head on top, the fuzzy looking seed head. I forget what it's called, sorry. But that one might be native. I haven't fully... It's so hard for me to tell it apart from some non-native foxtail grasses. But that one might be native, and I only get it in, like, certain areas, sprinkled around, like, the more moist areas. But basically what I'm trying to say is, if I have any voids in my garden beds at all, the non-native invasive grasses go, they move right in real quick. They got their suitcases packed and ready. They're ready. So I have to plant things extremely close together, and it does sometimes look messy. But I would rather it look messy with an intention behind it than no intention behind it. Like, if that makes any sense. When these non-native invasive grasses move into the beds, I do get upset by it, but I remind myself that there's always time to fix it. This is why my yard, or my garden, is kind of messy. Because I have areas like this on the screen right now, where to the left there's tons of Bermuda grass, and then in my hand is a potential native grass. Maybe. Don't quote me on that. And then I have these milkweed seeds here, which I just love the I know you guys probably are like, ew, that's ugly. Because there's seeds, and there's fluff, and there's bugs, but, like, I love that stuff. That stuff gives me life. Like, especially mixed into this meadow over here. I have this little meadow section with partridge pea, angara, blanket flower, lance leaf coreopsis, liatris, milkweed, specifically orange milkweed. And it's just beautiful. Look at this. Yeah, I know it's messy, but it's supposed to be messy. It's a meadow. Look at it. And there's that grass that might or might not be native. And you might say, rip that grass out. No. If it's native, I'm going to keep it. I actually like how it looks, so if it's native, I'm going to keep it. Now, if it's invasive, I got to work on that. But so far, it's only in these little patches here and there, so it makes me think it's not as aggressive, not even close as aggressive as that Dallas grass. Don't even get me started on Dallas grass, okay? It's insane. But Bermuda grass has been like my number one enemy. Crabgrass is my number 2 enemy. And now Dallas grass is my number 3 enemy. And it drives me nuts. But lots of partridge pea here. Some rudbeckia. Some coneflowers. The coneflowers are year 1. So the coneflowers are very small. You can't even really see them in this because they're just the leaves at the moment. But we got some ant action on that lance leaf coreopsis. I don't even know what's going on there, but they're having a ball. Another thing I want to discuss is native plants and their seed heads. On this partridge pea, you can see the little seed pods. They're green in this footage here. Earlier, you probably saw later footage of it, but in this video, they are green. They're about to just turn brown. When they turn brown, they are going to seed. That's what I'm talking about. Let your native plants seed themselves. Does that mean you can't save any seeds? No, you can still save some seeds. In fact, I still save some seeds, but I only save a tiny portion of seeds compared to the seeds I let just seed everywhere. And you may be like, oh my gosh, you just let your plants seed everywhere? Yeah. If they're native, they deserve to seed themselves around. If they belong here, they deserve to be in the seed bank, honey. Okay? I don't care what you say about the lawn having weeds in it. Your lawn doesn't belong here. Just saying. Your lawn was originally seeded as non-native turf grass. Okay? And so, technically, that's the weeds. Not what you're calling the weeds. Not the violets. Those aren't the weeds. We just don't see weeds, the word weed, as the same word. Like, we just totally have the opposite definition. Another thing, beyond just letting your natives receive themselves is paying attention to what works and what doesn't, which I think I already covered that. And I also covered ground cover. So I'm actually going to switch to another topic, which is the No-mow May type of topic. And I'm not really going to talk about just No-mow May. I'm going to talk about no-mow areas of your garden. So there are people in the native plant community that don't like the no-mow idea, and I understand why, but I think it's important to keep in mind that utilizing a no-mow area of your yard is actually, it can be really helpful, and I'll tell you how and why. So I don't have footage of it in this video because this is a whole different section of my garden. It's a more backyard section, it's a more wild section, but I have an area in my backyard that we just never mow. We just never ever mow it. Ever. And at first, I just kind of did it because there were some blackberry shrubs there, and I didn't want to mow them. And then I discovered there was some goldenrod back there, and I was like, I'm not gonna mow that. Why would I mow that? That's dumb. And so I was rewarded with the beautiful blooms of the goldenrod flowers. I mean, gorgeous golden yellow. Okay? And so that whole strip became a, we're not going to mow this because to the left we have blackberry shrubs and to the right we have goldenrod. Why in the world would we mow that? And so then, over the years, I have found native grasses popping up. Panic grasses is what they're called, which that name gives me life. As someone with anxiety, I just love the name of that, panic grass. Anyway, the seed heads are so freaking cool. They have like wavy seed head stalks. It's so hard to explain. You gotta look up panic grass. There's so many different kinds. It's really cool. And between the panic grasses and the blackberry shrubs and the goldenrod, we started to see blue stem. And I was like, what? I was so excited. I was like, okay, here's a native grass that I don't have really at all in my garden. I have in these little spaced out areas. I have some of it there, I have some of it in another no-mow area, and then I have some of it in another no-mow area. Notice a theme? The blue stem keeps coming up in areas where we do not mow. I find that very interesting. Do we have invasives that pop up in places where we don't mow? Yes, we do. I get it. I get that that's the negative side effect. But if we pull up things like privet, like the baby privets that come up in the no-mow areas, if we pull stuff like that up and the non-native honeysuckles, we can still have and keep the other things like the goldenrod and the blue stem and the panic grass. And what else do I have? I have a ridgeron, which is a pretty little white flower, and there's multiple ridgerons on my property too, which is cool. One of them blooms for a very long time. And anyways, I gotta cut this short because this is really long. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye! To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylou.com. Thanks for watching!